Read this before you leave. Emma's new father-in-law pressed an envelope into my hand at the wedding reception, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. The band was playing something upbeat, a Bruno Mars song that had half the guests on the dance floor. Champagne glasses clinked. Guests were laughing, taking photos, celebrating the union of two families. My daughter was radiant in her white dress, a vintage-style gown with delicate lace sleeves that she'd spent months searching for. She was dancing with her new husband Blake, her face glowing with happiness, her veil trailing behind her as they spun. Everything looked perfect, picture perfect, like a scene from a wedding magazine. The envelope felt heavy in my hands. Wrong. There was something about Gerald Foster's expression as he handed it to me, something calculated and cold beneath the social veneer of congratulations. He'd cornered me near the gift table, away from the other guests, his voice low and urgent when he said I needed to read this before the night ended. I stepped into the corridor outside the ballroom, the music fading to a muffled thump behind closed doors. The hallway was quiet, dimly lit, decorated with the same white roses and greenery that filled the reception space. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a DNA test result printed on official letterhead from GeneTech Laboratories, dated 2 weeks ago. The test compared Emma's DNA to my late husband Richard's DNA. Subject: Emma Louise Patterson. Subject B: Richard James Patterson, deceased. Probability of paternity: 0.00%. Conclusion: Richard James Patterson is excluded as the biological father of Emma Louise Patterson. The words blurred. I read them again, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But that was impossible. Completely, utterly impossible. I'd given birth to Emma, 28 years ago, at Mercy Hospital, on a cold March morning. I remembered every moment of that labor, every painful contraction, the overwhelming exhaustion, the doctor's encouraging words, Richard holding my hand and telling me I was doing great. I was almost there. I remembered the overwhelming joy when they placed her in my arms for the first time, this tiny, perfect creature with a shock of dark hair and Richard's nose. She'd opened her eyes and looked at me, and I'd felt my entire world shift and reconfigure around this new person. Richard had been there. He'd cut the umbilical cord. He'd cried when he first held her. This tough guy who never cried, tears streaming down his face as he whispered, "She's perfect. She's absolutely perfect." There had been no switch at the hospital, no confusion. Emma had stayed in my room the entire time. She'd worn an ID bracelet with my name on it. I'd nursed her myself. She'd never left my sight. I read the document again, searching for some mistake, some clerical error. There had to be an explanation. Lab mix-up, wrong samples, some administrative confusion. At the bottom of the report, a handwritten note on expensive cream-colored stationery. Emma has no legal claim to Richard's estate under the terms of his will. We filed a motion to exclude her as a beneficiary. The will clearly states biological children only. Sorry you had to find out this way, but thought you should know before this goes to court. Gerald Foster. Gerald Foster, Blake's father, a corporate attorney who'd made his fortune on hostile takeovers, corporate restructuring, and cutthroat negotiations. I'd met him 3 times before today and disliked him each time. Too smooth, too calculating. The kind of man who saw every interaction as a transaction, every person as an asset or liability, every relationship as a potential leverage point. But why would he do this? Why would he care about Richard's estate? Emma was marrying his son, not competing with him for money. Blake and Emma would be building a life together. If anything, Emma's inheritance would eventually benefit Blake, would give them financial security as they started their family. Unless someone else was involved. Someone who would directly benefit from Emma being disinherited. Someone who stood to gain everything if Emma received nothing. I looked through the glass doors back into the reception. Emma was still dancing, now with her bridesmaids, all of them laughing at something. Emma said. Blake's family clustered near the bar, a tight group of well-dressed people with expensive jewelry and practiced smiles. Gerald stood at the center, martini in hand, telling some story that had them all laughing at the punchline. And there, standing right next to Gerald, drink in hand, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years, was my son Michael. Michael, who'd barely spoken to Emma in the last 5 years. Michael, who'd complained constantly throughout their childhood that Emma got special treatment, better opportunities, more of Richard's attention. Michael, who'd skipped family dinners, who'd moved across town and rarely visited, who'd seemed perpetually angry at some perceived injustice in how his father treated him versus his sister. Michael, who'd asked me last month about the specifics of Richard's will, wanting to know exactly how the estate would be divided, what the timeline would be, whether there were any conditions or restrictions. I thought it was just practical planning, maybe prompted by Emma's engagement, making him think about his own future. I told him everything was split equally between him and Emma. The house, the investments, the life insurance, the retirement accounts, 50-50. Fair and simple. He'd seemed disappointed. I remembered now, not relieved or satisfied, but disappointed, like he'd been hoping for a different answer. Michael, who was now clinking glasses with Gerald Foster like they were old friends, like they'd known each other for years, instead of having just met at the engagement party 2 months ago. Michael, who was now clinking glasses with Gerald Foster like they were old friends. I walked back into the reception, on unsteady legs. The room spun slightly. I needed to talk to Michael. I needed to understand what was happening. But as I approached, Gerald saw me. His expression shifted, professional concern sliding across his face like a mask. "Patricia, did you read the documents? This test is wrong. I assure you, Gentech is the most reputable lab in the country. I've used them dozens of times for legal cases. Their results are court admissible. When did you order this test? Who gave you samples?" Gerald glanced at Michael, then back to me. "Michael reached out to me 3 months ago. He had some concerns about Emma's parentage. Given that she's now marrying into our family, I felt it prudent to verify the situation." Michael had concerns. I turned to my son. "You ordered a DNA test on your sister?" Michael had the decency to look uncomfortable, but only for a second. "Mom, I found some things in Dad's papers after he died. Letters, hints, that maybe Emma wasn't his biological daughter. I needed to know the truth." "What letters?" "Richard never said anything. He wouldn't, would he? If he suspected you'd been unfaithful, if he'd been raising another man's child all these years, he wouldn't want to admit it. It would destroy him." The accusation hung in the air between us. Unfaithful. Another man's child. 28 years of marriage, reduced to suspicion and betrayal. "I was never unfaithful to your father. Emma is his daughter." "The DNA test says otherwise," Gerald interjected smoothly. "And according to Richard's will, his estate is to be divided equally among his biological children. If Emma isn't his biological daughter, she has no legal claim. The will says children. It doesn't specify biological. Actually, it does. Page 7, subsection C. I've already reviewed it with my legal team. The language is clear. Richard wanted his estate to go to his biological descendants only." I tried to remember the will. Richard and I had drafted it together 15 years ago with our attorney, Margaret Wu. We'd been specific about many things, but biological children, I couldn't remember that clause. "I need to see the original will." "Of course, Margaret Wu has it on file, but I've already had my team pull a certified copy. The language is unambiguous." Gerald was too prepared, too smooth. This wasn't a concerned father-in-law looking out for his family. This was a lawyer executing a plan. "Why do you care?" I asked. "Emma's marrying your son. If anything, her inheritance would benefit Blake. Blake and Emma are signing a prenuptial agreement that specifically excludes any inheritance from her side of the family. Blake's trust fund is protected, and in turn, Emma's potential inheritance would remain separate. But if she has no inheritance, the prenup is moot. You're trying to cut my daughter out of her own father's will on her wedding day." "I'm ensuring legal clarity. The motion has been filed. There's a hearing scheduled for next week. Emma can contest it if she wishes, but the DNA evidence is conclusive." Michael touched my arm. "Mom, I know this is hard, but we have to face facts. If Emma isn't Dad's biological daughter, she shouldn't inherit what was meant for his actual children. It's not personal. It's fair." I looked at my son, really looked at him. He was 32 now, working in finance, always talking about market opportunities and leveraged positions. When had he become this person? This man who would weaponize DNA tests against his own sister? "How much is Richard's estate worth?" I asked quietly. Michael hesitated. Gerald answered. Approximately $2.3 million. The house, his investment portfolio, his life insurance, his pension. If Emma is excluded, Michael inherits everything instead of splitting it. Here it was. The motive. Over $1 million that would go to Michael if Emma was removed from the equation. I need to talk to Emma. Perhaps after the reception, Gerald suggested. No need to ruin her special day. You already did that when you handed me this envelope. I walked away before either of them could respond. I found Emma near the cake, laughing with her bridesmaids. She looked so happy, so beautiful, so completely unaware that her brother and new father-in-law were conspiring to destroy her inheritance. Emma, sweetheart, can I talk to you for a minute, privately? Her smile faded slightly. Mom, is everything okay? Just need a quick word. We stepped into the bridal suite. I handed her the envelope. She read it once, twice, her face going pale. This says Dad wasn't my biological father. I know, it's wrong. But Genentech is real. How could they be wrong? I don't know. But Emma, I gave birth to you. You're mine and Richard's. Blake's father filed a motion to exclude me from Dad's will. He's saying I have no legal claim. Emma sat down heavily. Michael put him up to this. You knew. I suspected. Michael's been weird lately, asking questions about Dad, about my childhood. I thought he was just being difficult. I didn't think he'd actually try to steal my inheritance. He ordered the DNA test 3 months ago. 3 months? Blake only proposed 6 weeks ago. Emma's eyes widened. Michael introduced me to Blake 8 months ago. What if this was planned from the start? I called Margaret Wu from the bridal suite. She answered, even though it was Saturday evening. Patricia, is everything okay? Margaret, I need you to pull Richard's will immediately. Gerald Foster claims there's language specifying biological children only. Is that true? I heard papers rustling. Let me check. Yes, subsection C. Richard insisted on that clause. He wanted his estate to go to his bloodline. My stomach dropped. Why would he insist on that? I asked at the time. He said it was about family legacy. Patricia, is there a problem? Gerald Foster had Emma DNA tested. Results say Richard isn't her biological father. Margaret was quiet. That's impossible. Richard would have known. Unless the test is fraudulent. Where did Michael get Richard's DNA? Find out, and get your own test done immediately. Use a different lab. I hung up and turned to Emma. We need to find out where Michael got your father's DNA sample. Dad's buried at Greenwood Cemetery. They didn't exhume him. They must have used something else. Something from the house. We left the reception early. Emma still in her wedding dress. Blake tried to follow, but Emma told him she needed space. He looked hurt, confused. Either he was a good actor or he genuinely didn't know what his father and my son were doing. At home, I went through Richard's things with Emma, watching from the doorway, still in her wedding dress because she'd refused to change, said she wanted to remember what she was wearing when her entire life fell apart. His bathroom still had his personal items exactly where he'd left them 5 months ago. I'd kept everything the same, unable to bring myself to pack away his toothbrush, his razor, his aftershave. It felt too final, too much like accepting he was really gone. But when I checked the counter, when I opened the drawer where he kept his comb and his nail clippers and his spare reading glasses, I noticed things were missing. The electric toothbrush that had sat in its charging station for 28 years was gone. So was the tortoiseshell comb he'd used every morning. The prescription eyeglasses he'd worn for close-up work had vanished from the bedside table. Michael has a key to the house, Emma said quietly, from the doorway. Remember? You gave him one after Dad died, in case of emergencies. He could have come here any time, I said, my stomach sinking, taken whatever he wanted. I wouldn't have noticed. I've barely been in this bathroom since Richard passed. I checked the medicine cabinet. Richard's prescription bottles were still there. Blood pressure medication, cholesterol pills, the antibiotics he'd been taking for a sinus infection the week before his heart attack. But his prescription bottle for reading glasses was gone. His nail clippers were missing. Even his old electric razor, the one he'd replaced 2 years ago but kept as a backup, had disappeared from under the sink. He cleaned out anything with Dad's DNA on it, Emma said, understanding dawning in her eyes. He wanted to control the samples. He wanted to make sure we couldn't run our own test. But that raised another question. If Michael had access to Richard's actual DNA, why would the test show no paternity? Why would Richard not be Emma's biological father, unless they didn't use Dad's DNA at all? Emma said, reading my mind the way she always did, the way Richard used to say, proved she was definitely his daughter because we could practically communicate telepathically. Unless they used someone else's and claimed it was Dad's. Whose DNA would they use? I don't know, but Mom, think about it. If they control the samples, they control the results. We don't know what Michael actually sent to the lab. We only know what the report says. The lab tested what they were given. If Michael sent in DNA from a stranger and labeled it as Richard Patterson, the lab would have no way to verify. They'd just test it and report that Emma Patterson and this random man aren't related, which is technically true, but meaningless because the random man isn't actually Dad. She was right. The entire test could be fabricated, not by falsifying the lab results, but by manipulating what went into the lab in the first place. Sample labels could be switched. DNA from any random man could be submitted with Richard's name on it, and the lab would dutifully test it and report back that Emma wasn't related to this person. The science would be accurate. The samples would be fraudulent. We need proof, I said. Real proof that can't be questioned or manipulated. How do we prove something didn't happen? How do we prove that Dad was my father when Michael has a test saying he wasn't? I thought about it. Richard had been to doctors throughout his life. He'd had surgery twice, appendix removal when he was 30, knee surgery at 47. He'd had blood work done regularly for his heart condition. All of that medical treatment would have generated records, samples, genetic information that would be on file at hospitals and clinics. Your father's medical records, I said. His blood type is on file, his genetic markers from various tests over the years. If we can get those records and compare them to you, we can show biological relationship. Will hospitals release that information? I'm his widow and executor of his estate. I have legal right to access his medical files. Over the next 3 days, I worked with an intensity I hadn't felt since Richard's death had left me numb and drifting. I contacted 3 different DNA testing labs and ordered 3 separate tests. I used Emma's saliva samples and compared them against my own DNA to confirm maternity beyond any shadow of doubt. I also requested Richard's medical records from his primary care physician, Dr. Harrison, who'd been treating him for 15 years, and from Mercy Hospital, where he'd had his knee surgery. Dr. Harrison's office was hesitant at first, citing privacy concerns, but when I explained that someone was trying to prove Emma wasn't Richard's daughter using a fraudulent DNA test, Dr. Harrison himself called me back. Patricia, I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. Richard talked about Emma constantly. He was so proud of her. The idea that someone would question their relationship is obscene. Can you help me? I'm pulling his files right now. Let's see, blood type B positive, which is consistent with having a daughter with A positive blood, which I believe Emma has from her medical forms when she was a child patient here. I also have genetic markers from a cardiac screening we did 3 years ago. I can provide all of this. The records arrived within 24 hours. Richard's blood type, his genetic markers, his family medical history, all documented across 15 years of treatment. I took everything to a geneticist, Dr. Sarah Kimura, who specialized in paternity testing for legal cases. Dr. Kimura reviewed the materials with professional thoroughness. Based on blood type, Richard Patterson could be Emma's biological father. The genetic markers show several alleles Emma would have inherited. This isn't a full profile, but it's enough to establish biological relationship. Can you put that in a report? Absolutely. I can testify if needed. I also hired a forensic investigator named James Chen to look into gene tech and the specific test Gerald had presented. James was a former FBI agent who now worked private cases, specializing in document fraud and evidence tampering. He found something interesting within 48 hours of starting his investigation. The test was real, he said, when he called, his voice careful and precise. GeneTech did process a sample. Their lab records confirm they received 2 DNA samples on the date shown in the report and ran a paternity analysis. But here's the problem. There's no chain of custody documentation. No notarized forms confirming who provided the samples. No witness signatures. no photo ID verification. Anyone could have sent in any DNA and labeled it however they wanted. So Michael could have sent in random DNA and claimed it was Richard's. Exactly. Gentech would have no way to verify. They're a lab, not an investigation service. They test what they're given. If someone sends them sample A labeled Emma Patterson and sample B labeled Richard Patterson, they'll test those samples and report whether they're related. They don't investigate whether the labels are accurate. So the test results are technically true, but practically meaningless. In a legal sense, yes. A good attorney could get this thrown out based on lack of proper documentation. The chain of custody is broken before it even begins. Gerald Foster is a good attorney. Then you need a better one, and you need to attack the credibility of how those samples were collected. Make the court question every step of Michael's process. I called Margaret Wu back. I need you to represent Emma. Gerald's trying to exclude her from the will based on a questionable DNA test. I'll file a motion to dismiss. But Patricia, Michael filed a second motion yesterday. He's claiming you had knowledge of Emma's questionable parentage and committed fraud. He's positioning himself as the victim and asking for damages plus the full estate. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. I arrived with Emma and Margaret Wu, carrying 3 folders of evidence. The courthouse was downtown, intimidating in its institutional coldness. Michael was there with Gerald Foster and 2 attorneys. The courtroom was small and cold, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Judge Sandra Kowalski reviewed the motions with a practiced eye, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Mr. Foster, you're asking the court to exclude Emma Patterson from her father's estate based on DNA evidence. Let's see it. Gerald presented the Gentech report with the confidence of a man who'd won 1,000 cases. He explained the results, the science, the clear implications. He made it sound airtight, incontrovertible, like no reasonable person could question the findings. Then Margaret stood up. Your Honor, this DNA test has no chain of custody documentation. There's no notarized verification of who provided the samples. There's no photo ID confirmation. There's no witness signatures. Anyone could have submitted any DNA and labeled it however they wanted. The lab tested what they were given, but we have no proof that what they were given actually came from Richard Patterson. The lab is reputable, Gerald countered smoothly. Gentech is used in courts across the country. The lab is only as reliable as the samples provided. If the person submitting the samples lied about what they were, the results are meaningless. Garbage in, garbage out. Judge Kowalski frowned. Miss Wu, do you have evidence that the samples were mislabeled? I have evidence that makes the test results questionable at best and fraudulent at worst. Patricia Patterson has submitted 3 independent DNA tests from 3 different accredited labs, all confirming that Emma is her biological daughter. We also have Richard Patterson's medical records from 15 years of treatment showing a blood type that is consistent with Emma's and genetic markers that Dr. Sarah Kimura, a board-certified geneticist, has confirmed are consistent with biological paternity. She laid out each piece of evidence methodically. The 3 DNA tests, all showing I was Emma's mother without question. Richard's blood type from his medical records, B positive, which was completely compatible with producing a child with Emma's A positive blood type. The genetic markers from his cardiac screening showing shared alleles with Emma. Hospital records from Emma's birth showing Patricia Patterson gave birth to a healthy girl on March 15, 1997, and that girl was Emma Louise Patterson. Furthermore, Margaret continued, the original Gentech test was submitted by Michael Patterson, who stands to inherit everything if Emma is excluded from the estate. He had clear financial motive. He also had unsupervised access to his parents' home and could have taken or substituted any samples he wanted. Michael stood up, his face flushed. I didn't falsify anything. I sent in Dad's toothbrush and Emma's hair sample. The lab did the rest. I'm not the bad guy here. Where did you get the toothbrush? From Dad's house, from his bathroom. It was sitting in the charger where it had always been. Margaret pulled out a receipt, placing it on the judge's bench. This is a purchase order from Michael Patterson to a company called DNASampleSupply.com, dated 3 months ago, before the Gentech test was ordered. He purchased a sterile sample collection kit and what the website calls a universal male DNA reference sample for $50 plus shipping. The courtroom went completely silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a second. "What is a universal male DNA reference sample?" Judge Kowalski asked, her voice sharp. "It's a generic DNA sample from an anonymous male donor used for comparison testing in research laboratories and educational settings. According to the website, it's human DNA that can be used for any comparison or control testing where the specific identity of the donor is not relevant." Margaret paused. If Michael submitted this generic sample labeled as his father's DNA, the test would naturally show no paternal relationship to Emma because the sample wasn't actually from her father, it was from a complete stranger. Gerald's face had gone pale. Michael was shaking his head vigorously. "That's not what I did. I ordered that kit for something else entirely, a genealogy project I was working on. It had nothing to do with Emma." "You ordered a male reference sample for a genealogy project about your own family, your own male family line?" I was doing research on, it's complicated. Or it's simple. You ordered fake DNA, submitted it as your father's DNA, and manufactured evidence to disinherit your sister. Judge Kowalski looked at the evidence spread before her, then at Michael, then at Gerald Foster, then back at the motions. Her expression had gone from professional neutrality to barely concealed anger. "I'm denying the motion to exclude Emma Patterson from the estate. The DNA evidence presented by Mr. Foster is questionable at best and appears to be fraudulent. The will's language about biological children is clearly satisfied by the overwhelming evidence that Emma is both Patricia and Richard Patterson's biological daughter." "Your Honor," Gerald started, but she held up her hand. "I'm also ordering Michael Patterson to pay Emma Patterson's legal fees incurred in defending against this motion. And I'm referring this matter to the State Bar Association for investigation into whether Mr. Foster knew or should have known that his client had purchased fraudulent DNA samples for use in this proceeding." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed in the small courtroom. Michael tried to leave quickly, but I caught his arm in the hallway outside the courtroom. "Why? Why would you do this to your sister?" He pulled away, his expression a mixture of anger and shame. "Because she got everything. Dad loved her more. He spent more time with her. He paid for her college, her car, her apartment deposit. I had to work for everything while she just smiled and got whatever she wanted." "That's not true. Your father loved you both equally." "It is true, and I was tired of being second. So yes, I bought a fake DNA sample. I thought if I could prove she wasn't really his daughter, I'd finally get what I deserved." He looked at me, and for a moment I saw the little boy he'd been, the child who'd felt overshadowed by his younger sister. "But I deserve to be cut out now, don't I?" He walked away before I could answer. "Emma and Blake are still married, though they moved to Seattle. She needed distance from everything that happened. The estate was settled 6 months later. Emma received her half, Michael received his half, too, but had to pay $45,000 in legal fees. Gerald Foster was reprimanded by the state bar but kept his license. Blake doesn't speak to his father anymore. I still live in the same house. Richard's toothbrush is gone, taken by Michael for a fraud that never happened. But I have photos, memories, 28 years of watching Emma grow with Richard's stubborn determination and his quick laugh. DNA tests can be manipulated. Samples can be faked, but truth has weight that manufactured evidence can never match. Hospital records don't lie. Birth certificates don't change. And a mother knows her child. If someone ever uses science against you, remember that science is only as honest as the person conducting it. Verify everything. Check chain of custody. Ask who benefits from the results. My son chose money over family. He's living with that choice. Emma chose truth. And truth was stronger than any conspiracy Michael could construct. Sometimes the evidence that saves you isn't the most sophisticated. It's the simplest: a birth certificate, a hospital record, a mother's testimony. Trust that. Fight for it. Don't let anyone rewrite your family's history for profit.